Welcome back to Gabby's Art Studio. Today I'm going to be texturing with some eggshells, and I kept some eggshells and dried them out for a few days so they didn't smell. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to crush them up, and then I'm going to experiment with some school glue, which is also washable and it doesn't run, and apply the textures to where the glue is and then paint over it and see what happens. It actually creates some really interesting textures if you want to add textures to your canvases rather than just having a flat canvas and you're looking at creating abstract works of art. So before I start, I'll tape my paper down, and what I'm using at the moment is just some Arches 300 GSM rough. You can use cold press or you can use hot press, sorry, forgot there. The hot press tends to leave a really rough texture, and sometimes that can look quite nice if that's what you're intending to achieve. So always tape your paper down so that it's nice and flat and hopefully won't buckle too much. Okay, and it also leaves a nice border for you to play with later on. Okay, so I've taped it down. The tape I've used is just a masking tape you can get from any hardware store. It's basically used, it's low tack, and it's used to mask out skirting boards if you're painting your house, so that you don't if you don't want to paint the skirting boards and they're already done or they're stained. So this is quite good. You can get different ones in different colours, but I find the blue one quite good. And make sure that it has the word washi, because I did use another one and it was inexpensive, but it didn't work and it tore the paper. So you must sort of take into consideration those things, because it's nice just to have a crisp border. Okay, so I'll start by just crushing up my eggs. Just put them in some plastic. Now you can either go really fine or chunky pieces. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So I only have a small piece of paper here, so I'm actually going to go quite fine and see what happens. Have done this before. This is quite experimental. You can also use a matte medium that helps you with watercolour paints, and it's quite sticky. So I'm always looking for things around the house that can be recycled and see what I can do with them. You can just do it, free, but I just find eggshells can cut your fingers as well. They're pretty sharp. And what doesn't get used, lovely for compost in the garden. Okay, so you just mush it all up. You can use the palm of your hand, or even anything that you can find on your desk. Looks pretty fine, I think. I can continue, almost get it to a powder, but we don't want that. We actually want some textural effects. Okay. Now I won't be painting essentially with this straight away. I need to apply the glue and then stick the eggshells down. So what I'm going to do, I've got some glue here, just inexpensive school glue. I'm just going to create a bit of a landscape with the glue. Maybe you can draw with it if you want to. It has got a nozzle on it, so it makes it easy. I guess you can use anything. I mean, you could probably make a paste out of water and flour if you don't have glue at home. Just do a little bit of balance here. Always look at doing things in threes. It must be my design training. Okay, so I've got a fair bit of glue on that. Glue. I'm going to stick it down. See what happens. So sprinkle it on the top. Tap it down. Don't be too precious with it, because it'll only stick where the glue is anyway, and so once you lift it off you can actually lift the remnants, bits that don't have glue will fall off anyway. Okay. Don't worry too much about the colour, but sometimes I think about, well, it's already got a beige colour and white, and maybe I might do a landscape, an abstraction using those hues, and then creating a little bit of contrast later on, just to see what happens. Okay, so tap them down, spread them out where the glue is, let it stick. I'm going to have to wait for this to dry to actually apply the paint. So I'm just going to stick that down for now. Spread it out, make it flat. We want some texture, don't necessarily want it to be too lumpy because we are playing with watercolours later. It'll either be watercolours or a combination of acrylics, whatever works. Okay, so you just leave that to dry. Might take a few hours or it might take a day, and then once it's dry I'll lift off the page, shake off the excess, and hopefully some of it has stuck down. I'll just use a brush just to stick it down a little bit more to make sure. It tends to stick to your fingers. Okay, so I'm just going to wait for that to dry and I'll be back. Okay, the eggshells have now dried and I'm going to apply a wash of just plain water, and after that I'll add some Art Spectrum yellow and Art Spectrum ochre yellow with maybe a little bit of purple as well, all Art Spectrum paints. They are watercolours. So just wash it out a little bit and see what happens. Dab it because we want the colour to come into the eggshells. Water is slightly tinted with a little bit of yellow ochre. Okay, I probably would, if I did this next time, I would actually crush the eggs a little bit more and make them smaller. Okay, so adding a little bit of colour, allowing it to bleed in, lovely. Like so. Into here. Over the top. The eggs are quite porous, so they'll absorb some of the pigment. You can do this using white eggs. I didn't have any white eggs. I generally don't find a lot of white eggs these days in the supermarket. It tends to be where we are, yellow eggs. Okay, so I'd probably dry that off a little bit and add a little bit more colour to the eggs. You can see the texture happening. Quite interesting. I don't mind it pooling a little bit. What I might do is just put a little bit of a dash of the purple just to complement the colour. Oh, beautiful. Lovely. Through there. Just a little bit in there. Just maybe in here and here. Okay. Okay. Try and use a hairdryer to dry it off and see what happens. You can move the pigment around. Okay, so as you can see, you can still see the brown of the eggs. Now if you want to make it change the colour a little bit more, you can use acrylics to do that with. So I'm going to just experiment with a little bit of acrylic and see what happens. So I've got some acrylics here. They're Jasonia paints. Got a little bit of gold. And let me have a look if I've got, okay, yellow. So I'm just going to put a tiny little bit of yellow on my palette here. See what happens. Okay, so I might just mix a little bit of the ochre with the yellow. Although they're different paints, they tend to mix quite well. So let's do, I might change the colour of that a little bit more. The acrylic tends to change because it's a thicker consistency. It does change the colour of the paint. And the egg shells, I'd say if you're doing this, it would be probably better if you're going to use the Art Spectrum watercolours is to use quite a thick consistency. I wanted to try what would happen if I just blended the colour. It looks good for the background, but I would go back into it with a thicker consistency. Just to show you. I just scattered the eggs anywhere. You can actually put them wherever you like. Just wanted to see what would happen. So yeah, it seems to be changing the colour a bit more. Oops, a bit of red there. All right, so I've dried it off. You can play around with it and dilute the acrylics. And go over the top if you like. You can still see the watermarks of this where I moved it with a hairdryer. Don't have to use a hairdryer if you don't want to. You can use, just wait for it to dry in different stages. Just play with it, have fun with it. Doesn't work out, nothing's lost. You've learnt something. I quite like that red. Has a lovely contrast. You can just dab it in and in between the shells, and it just picks up the colour quite nicely. Start to change it, and it settles. The pigment actually settles in between the eggshells, and it creates a bit of a darker contrast. Not sure how it's going to actually dry up, but it looks quite nice. It's running lovely. Love the way it's pooling around the actual eggshells in here, just the edge of it. So this is not acrylic that I'm using. I think I used a Spectrum colour. It's left over from another painting that I did, my Ghost Gums. And I just keep all these palettes here. I don't, sometimes I put them in a box and keep them for quite some time, and you just have to add water, and most of the time they come up really lovely. So this is another one. It's an old one. It's all dried up, but I guarantee that if I put water in that, it will come up lovely. Okay, so you just put a little, dab it around, be creative. Yeah. Don't be too contrived. Don't worry where it's going to take you, because sometimes it might end up a happy accident. And It's kind of nice. I quite like that. Okay, just put a little bit in there. I mean, you might want to create some sort of a scene out of it. I'm not doing that. I'm just exploring what I can do with textures and how I can push the textures. And by doing little experiments like this, it gives me lots of ideas for my canvases and how they would work on a canvas. So I've learnt through this experience that if I was doing something quite small like this, I would consider maybe crushing the eggs further so that they're smaller pieces. Okay, so we've got a bit of a cauliflower happening up here, which is the lovely lines. And if you're a true watercolour artist, they don't like the cauliflowers. I don't mind them. They create a little bit of texture. It's a bit different. Even the watermark that's happened up here is quite interesting. Okay, so I might decide just to run a little bit more purple in there. Oh, it's a purple, it's a crimson. Actually, I don't really know what colour it is anymore because it's been mixed up with quite a lot of stuff. Okay. You might want to use a bit of a mop brush here. And then you might want to pick up some more pigment. This is a bit pinker. And just dab it in and let it do its thing. It's just running in amongst the eggshells. So you might decide that down here you want to increase the colour a bit more. Make it more pink, red. Okay. So basically you have a piece that's you know, interesting. Where can you go from this? I'm not quite sure. You possibly could print over it, or you could keep working back into it. You can add more eggshells to it. You can add some white eggshells to it. You can create textures while this is all wet by using, and I've done this before, using just scrunched up tissue. So we'll have a look at, if I scrunched up the tissue, what happens. So you can get some different sort of effects, like so. Now you could develop this into a landscape, a rocky scape, by adding a bit more colour down here. So we could go quite an intense colour really quickly. You might want to introduce another colour. I try to work with 3 colours when I'm starting out a new piece. I find that it works better that way. It's easier to manage. Often look at the colour wheel and think about contrasting colours, or think about colours that are similar, like a cool palette or a warm palette, and how I can enhance that. Now what I'm going to do, and I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to experiment with it and have a bit of fun, is I have a little bit of gold here. I've got this thing about using gold. Oops, whoa, that's a bit much. Oh well, hey ho, that's what happens. Need to be a bit more careful. Okay, so I'm not going to wait until it dries. I might just add it on now, see what happens. It can add quite an interesting effect. Or you can wait for it to dry, pop it on your finger and rub it across. That looks interesting up there. Didn't have a lot of pigment, so I might try and dab it up here a bit more. Okay, I'm not going to put too much of that on there because that wasn't my intention. All right. That's an interesting piece. I mean, you can work back into this later on with some other colours if you wanted to. I quite like the effects. I like what how the eggshells have worked. I know that I've got ideas that I could possibly do a landscape painting and use eggshells to create rocks, textures with rocks, and make it look really quite rough and rugged. So it could be interesting. Just going to use the back of a brush just to see if I can draw back in some lines, what would happen. So this is starting to dry, so the movement of the pigment isn't drying, isn't moving as much, which indicates that it's starting to dry. Just going to add a little bit more texture here. And see what happens to it. Now I could add a little bit of a moon there, and I should have done that before. I keep forgetting I've got this sticky round dot sticky label just over here. So, oops. Okay, so if I was to put this on here, and I added a bit more colour. I'll see if I can do this on another one where you've got the moon. I've done this when I've used one colour, which is really quite cool. All right, I'll just put maybe a little bit more colour, maybe just to wet it a little bit because it's dried up just in here, just to show you. And maybe just run some colour pigment in here and across it. Maybe down. Up the top. Now I'd leave that in for a while, and what you'll find is you'll get a little bit of a mark, and hopefully it hasn't bled too much underneath. It's best to use not one that's used like I have, but a brand new one. I normally have a little roll of dots in different sizes that I use to do things like this. I'm starting to think maybe I should put a bit more brown in here. It's starting to look more and more like a landscape. So as you can see, things just evolve into whatever you want them to evolve. So I've got a little bit of Art Spectrum burnt sienna hue. Just experiment. It's quite a nice colour. Yeah, it's a rich sort of terracotta colour. You might want to just blend it through. Maybe in here. On the rocks. I kind of like that, just for a bit of contrast. Remnants on the brush, just run it through really quickly. Don't be too precious with it. Maybe add a bit more texture with, got a bit flat. Okay, and then probably add, I feel like I need to put a little bit of a darker brown there just to see what happens. Blue. Might need to make a brown with a little bit of green, so I have a little bit of olivey green. Not quite the olive. That's what happens when you don't have all your paints. Okay, let's turn that into a little bit of a brown. Adding a little bit green in here. Okay, see what happens. Yep, that's good. That's good. It's just got a bit of a green tinge. You probably can't see it on the video. Okay, I'm just going to leave it at that for now. You can continue adding a bit more. I mean, I might even, I can never stop. I always, oh, I'll put a little bit of blue in. Always find something else to put in. So see what happens if I just touch a bit of blue in there. Yeah, it just makes a bit of a difference. So because it's quite orange, I've decided, okay, I'm going to put a little bit of blue as a bit of a contrast. It does look quite good in here. Mixed it up on the side. Oops. Just in here. So you keep building colour, you know, it's quite interesting what happens. It's quite dark there, just as in here. Build a bit of area. Always balance it out a little bit if you've got just a smidget in here. Just play around with it, have fun. That's the main thing, it's fun. Even if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. So I tell my students that, especially the ones that are anxious. It's good to make mistakes, you learn from them. Now I want to put some reeds in. Told you, I can never stop. Once I get started, I keep going. They're great to put reeds with the end of a brush when, you know, it's still wet. It's just adding more textures, that's all. They might not be reeds, they might be something else to somebody else. So if you scratch quite while it's still wet, you can scratch some designs in here if you want. I'm just mucking around with it at the moment, just seeing what happens. It's quite wet. I might decide to put a little bit more darkness just in here. Okay. Now that blue's sort of turned a bit green because it's mixed with a bit of yellow, but that's okay, that's good. It's doing its own thing. Okay. See that? Just all right, so you have something happening. I don't mind it actually. I think it's really, I love the textures. I really like the textures. I don't mind the colours either. So I might just try and get rid of some of those cauliflowers. Some of my friends that are watercolour artists will go, no, you can't have cauliflowers. Of course you can have cauliflowers, you can have whatever you want. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually peel this. Fingers crossed it's worked. Oh, sort of. Yeah, I need a brand new one. So, but as you can see, you get the concept there. So I might just add a little bit of, show that it's sort of there. Might even try and absorb it. Maybe it'll come off if I do that with a tissue. Running out of tissues here. Okay, just, oh, you get the idea. Anyway, looks like a bit of a moon shape. So, you know, you can play around, and when this dries, you might want to put a little bit of darkness through it. Actually, see, I can't stop, get addicted to this stuff. I might just put a few little black little lines. There we go. You can use a rigger brush, which is a really long brush. So I'll just go through the brushes because I didn't introduce the brushes I was using in this one here, which I'll do now. Okay, so I might just use, because I've started it, I may as well finish it. So I've got some Art Spectrum here. That's watercolour. Just going to use it straight out of the tube, just run a few black lines. Because I've got quite a lot of water on my brush, it's actually turning out charcoal and not black like I wanted to. Oh, it's a bit black here. Don't want it to be too contrived. What I might do is I might work back into it just with a felt tip pen later on. If you work quickly, it's much better because you can't control the squiggles and the lines. If you work sort of taking your time, you tend to be a lot more controlled, which is what I'm trying not to do. I can sort of see a little bit of something happening in here. Okay, yeah, maybe in here. Maybe in here. You could do all sorts of things in here if you wanted to. I like the way that now these colours are all drying up, really taking place, making it look quite interesting. Okay. Right. Okay, I just saw something. I was meant to finish about 15 minutes ago and I'm still going. This is what happens. You see things as you go and you keep building and building. And I never know when to stop. So I can see like a little bit of little trees up here. I might try and make them a bit more obvious. It's still a little bit wet. Maybe just here. So you can add different textures. So this is quite a dry brush. It's a Sable number 8 brush. I don't have a lot of pigment on my brush. And because it's dry, it's just picking up little bits and pieces. Put some like trees and things if you want to. Just in the distance there. For something slightly different. And then maybe, I've got a felt tip pen. It's probably quite wet to work with it. Oh, okay. Oh no, it's not that bad. It's pretty good actually. Oh, that looks cool. Great. Yay, wanted a little bit of black in there. So you can, you know, this is a mixed media piece. Okay. And this particular pen, it's a uni pen, fine, and it's a waterproof pen. You can get ones I really like to work with that are similar to this, and they are, they bleed and they make the most beautiful designs. So you have a little bit of a control as to where you want the bleeds and the mark making. So in here I've got a few like little, what I saw as trees. Just some tiny branches or trunks just to indicate that they are trees. It's running out. Maybe it's because I'm using it on wet. Okay. All right. So this area is just a little bit dark. I might just absorb it. Go into here with this. Okay, so see now it's not working. Might come back in a minute. Yeah, so it works better when it is dry. I'm just a bit impatient, that's all. Okay, you can have some other ones here. Sometimes it's good to have a couple of them. I've got another one. This one here. So this is another one. It's the same thing, different brand. It's still not, doesn't run. Okay, and you might decide just to swipe a little bit of colour off it, just to make it a bit lighter, or you can add a little bit of white if you want to. I've got a little bit of white that's dried up in here. I'll have a go at that. So I'm starting to convert this into a landscape. I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to play with textures, but I'm enjoying what I'm doing here. It's kind of looking quite fun to do. Now white. No white. Here's the white. Okay. Oh, here it is. Titanium white. Okay, so just out of the tube, a little bit of water, dilute it a bit. You can run it across here. It's kind of opaque. You might have that moon up there, and you might want to sort of, I don't know, have a bit of a reflection happening on the water. Probably do this before you do the reeds. I've done it the wrong way around. Okay, so you might just play with that a little bit more and just bring it out. You don't want to get rid of all that lovely sky that's happened with the bleeds of the purpley colour and the ochre. All right, it's probably a little bit too big, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so just leave it at that. I think I'll stop working on it because otherwise I'll never stop. Okay, never know when an artwork is finished. Always come back to it and add something else, and that's the beauty about it. There's no right or wrong. It's just about having fun with it, and it doesn't matter if anybody else likes it. It's just fun. So thanks for watching. Give me a like if you like it. I really appreciate it. Thank you.